So we finally have something new to talk about with the Elder Scrolls 6. Asha Sharma, the CEO of Xbox, recently visited Bethesda and apparently got to see a live playthrough of the game behind closed doors. She came away pretty positive, specifically talking about the scale of the game and saying that the story impressed her even more. And obviously, I don't think anyone should hear an Xbox executive say an Xbox game looks amazing and immediately start preparing their Game of the Year speech. She's obviously not an unbiased source here. But honestly, that's not really the part I find interesting. The interesting part is that there is apparently enough of the Elder Scrolls 6 working right now that Bethesda can sit someone down and actually demonstrate the game. Not concept art or a tech demo, an actual live playthrough. And considering how long we've been waiting here with basically nothing other than the Mountain trailer from 2018, that at least makes the game feel a little more real, but it also immediately raises a bunch of questions for me. Because hearing that the Elder Scrolls 6 looks impressive is nice, I want to know why that is. One of the biggest things I'm curious about is the Creation Engine 3, and I know the Creation Engine conversation has basically become a meme at this point where every Bethesda game releases and half the internet immediately starts screaming that they need to throw the entire engine into fire. I don't necessarily think it's that simple. There are things Bethesda's engine does really well, especially when it comes to object persistence, modding, and giving the player an absurd amount of freedom inside these worlds. But Starfield also showed some pretty obvious limitations. The game was intended to sell you the fantasy of exploring an entire galaxy, yet the experience of moving through that galaxy was constantly interrupted with the infamous loading screens. That's probably my biggest question when I hear that the Elder Scrolls 6 is now running on Creation Engine 3. Not whether Bethesda changed the number from 2 to 3. I want to know what that actually means when I'm playing the game. Can I walk into a major city without hitting a loading screen? Can I enter a building naturally? Can the world stream things quickly enough that traveling across it actually feels continuous? Because we're talking about systems that other open world games moved past a long time ago, and if Elder Scrolls 6 releases however many years from now and I'm still opening a door, staring at a black screen, and then appearing inside somebody's house, I don't know, that's going to feel pretty difficult to ignore, especially because this is Elder Scrolls. One of the main reasons these games work is that feeling that the world exists around you and you can just disappear into it. Every interruption makes that illusion a little harder to maintain. And that's actually why Sharma talking about the scale of the game catches my attention, because scale can mean a lot of things. It could mean the map is enormous, it could mean the cities are bigger, maybe there are huge battles or landscapes that look incredible when you first see them. We don't really know. And personally, I'm not even sure I want Elder Scrolls 6 to be substantially larger than Skyrim just for the sake of it being larger. I'd much rather have a world where the places actually feel interesting. One of the things Skyrim did so well was that you could leave Whiterun because you wanted to do one quest, see something strange in the distance, and completely forget what you were originally doing. That's the type of scale I care about. If the world is huge, but I'm constantly traveling through empty space to reach the interesting parts, then we've already seen what that looks like with Starfield. So when Sharma says the scale is impressive, I'm interested. I just want to know what kind of scale we're really talking about here. The other thing she specifically mentioned was the story, and honestly, that's probably the comment I'm more curious about, because Bethesda can be really good at this. Oblivion has some fantastic quest lines, Fallout has had genuinely memorable stories and characters. Skyrim's main story probably isn't why most people remember Skyrim, but the world is filled with smaller stories that become part of your own experience. And then you have Starfield. I don't hate the idea behind Starfield's story, but I never thought the execution was particularly satisfying, especially when you consider how much mystery the game builds around the artifacts, the Starborn, and what exactly is going on with the universe. For me, the payoff never really matched that build-up. So when someone comes away from an Elder Scrolls 6 demonstration and says the story was actually the part that impressed them more than the spectacle, okay, now you've got my attention. What kind of story are we talking about here? Is this another Bethesda story that's mainly there to give you an excuse to explore the world, or are they actually trying to make the main narrative a much bigger part of the experience this time? And I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. I just hope they remember what Bethesda stories are good at. Give me interesting factions, weird side quests, give me characters that I actually remember after finishing the game. I don't need every quest to involve the destruction of the entire planet. Sometimes the best Elder Scrolls quests are literally just you walking into a town, talking to somebody who clearly has a problem, and somehow ending up underground fighting something that absolutely was not mentioned when you accepted the job. That's the stuff I want back. Then there is this whole thing about the title, because Sharma's post apparently used 8 asterisks after the Elder Scrolls 6, and people have obviously done what Elder Scrolls fans do when Bethesda gives them approximately 8 pixels of new information. They investigated everything. And the theory right now is that the subtitle could be Sentinel. There are a few different things supporting the theory, including an Easter egg people noticed in Starfield marketing and comments from former Elder Scrolls writer Michael Kirkbride. And Sentinel would obviously point pretty heavily towards Hammerfell. Now, I think this stuff is fun. I genuinely do. The fact that people are digging through footage from years ago trying to decode numbers because somebody put 8 asterisks in a social media post says a lot about how much interest there still is around this game. People clearly haven't stopped caring about Elder Scrolls, but at the same time, it's just a title. I don't think learning that the game might be called the Elder Scrolls 6 Sentinel suddenly tells us what the game is. What it does do is give us something to work with. Because if Sentinel really is important to the game, then the setting becomes pretty interesting. You're potentially dealing with a major coastal city, the Iliac Bay, desert areas, trade routes, and a lot of maritime activity. And that's where my brain immediately starts going somewhere else. Ships. Now this is just me speculating. There is absolutely nothing confirming that Elder Scrolls 6 has some huge sailing mechanic. But I would be surprised if Bethesda doesn't at least look at what worked in Starfield and try to bring some of those ideas forward. And one of the things Starfield genuinely did really well was ship customization. Building a ship, changing the layout, choosing different modules, and gradually creating something that actually felt like yours was one of the coolest systems in that game. So if we're really going to Hammerfell and the coast becomes an important part of the map, why not reuse some of that thinking? Obviously, I'm not talking about putting a spaceship in Elder Scrolls, although I'm sure somebody will mod one in roughly 6 minutes after the creation kit releases. I'm thinking about owning a ship. Maybe you upgrade it over time, change the interior of it, hire a crew, use it to travel around the Iliac Bay or reach islands that aren't accessible from the mainland. That sounds like something that could fit Elder Scrolls incredibly well, and more importantly, it could give the game another type of exploration without creating the same disconnected feeling Starfield had. You're still traveling through one continuous world, you're just doing it from the water instead. Again, completely speculative, but that's the kind of thing the possible setting makes me interested in. And I think that's probably where I'm at with all of this news. I don't really care that much that an executive says the game looks amazing. Of course he does. What interests me is everything underneath that statement. There's now enough of the Elder Scrolls 6 working that Bethesda can actually demonstrate it. Creation Engine 3 is running the game, and I'm really curious to see whether that means some of the technical limitations we've associated with Bethesda games are finally starting to disappear. Someone who has actually seen the game is talking about its scale and, more surprisingly, its story. And then you have the Sentinel theory, potentially giving us our first real idea of what kind of world Bethesda is building. None of this tells us whether the Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be good. We're still speculating based on an incredibly small amount of information. But I think we're finally getting to the point where the interesting questions are no longer just when is this coming out. Now I'm starting to wonder what walking through the world actually feels like, what the cities will look like, whether ships are involved, what Bethesda has done with the engine, and whether the story actually gives me a reason to care about everything happening around me. Those are the things I want to see next. Because after waiting this long, I don't really need another teaser showing me a mountain. I'd quite like to see the game now.